For decades, the United States dollar has stood at the center of the global financial system. It has been the world's reserve currency, the backbone of international trade, and the foundation of global confidence. But history teaches us that no financial empire lasts forever. Every reserve currency eventually faces a moment when debt, money printing, and economic imbalance begin to challenge its dominance. Today, according to many economists and investors, including Ray Dalio, warning signs are appearing that could signal the beginning of a major shift, while most people continue with their daily lives, unaware of what is happening behind the scenes. The financial world is becoming increasingly concerned about a growing debt burden, rising interest costs, and declining confidence in long-term fiscal stability. The question is no longer whether challenges exist. The question is what happens next. To understand why this moment matters, we must first understand how the current system was built. After World War II, the United States emerged as the world's strongest economic power. The dollar became the primary currency used in global trade and finance. Countries held dollars as reserves, businesses borrowed in dollars, and investors trusted American financial markets. This gave the United States enormous advantages. It could borrow money more easily than other nations and finance large government spending programs without facing the same pressures that weaker economies experience. For decades, this system worked remarkably well. However, every advantage comes with risks. Over time, easy access to borrowing encouraged larger and larger deficits. Governments of both political parties spent more money than they collected in taxes. Debt continued to rise during economic booms and economic recessions alike. Each crisis brought another wave of borrowing. The 2008 financial crisis increased debt dramatically. The pandemic accelerated borrowing to levels never seen before in peacetime history. Today, the national debt has reached levels that would have been unimaginable just a generation ago. Many people assume debt is not a problem because governments can always borrow more. But there is an important difference between borrowing and sustaining debt. As debt grows, interest payments also grow. Eventually, a larger share of government revenue must be used simply to pay interest. This leaves less money available for infrastructure, healthcare, education, defense, and other priorities. When interest costs rise faster than economic growth, governments face difficult choices. This is where Stage 3 begins. In Ray Dalio's framework of debt cycles, Stage 3 is the period when debt levels become so large that investors start paying closer attention to sustainability. Confidence does not collapse overnight. Instead, concerns gradually build. Bond buyers begin demanding higher yields. Governments face rising borrowing costs. Central banks face pressure to intervene. The system becomes increasingly dependent on confidence. What makes this situation particularly important today is the speed at which debt is growing compared to economic output. Economic growth can help reduce debt burdens over time, but when debt rises much faster than growth, the gap widens. This creates a situation where future generations inherit increasingly larger obligations. At some point, investors begin asking whether the current path can continue indefinitely. Another critical factor is money creation. When governments face financial pressure, central banks often step in to support markets and maintain stability. This can involve lowering interest rates or purchasing government bonds. While these actions can provide short-term relief, they can also create long-term concerns about currency value. If too much money is created relative to economic output, inflation can emerge. Even moderate inflation slowly reduces purchasing power. People may feel like they are earning more money, but their dollars buy less. For ordinary families, the consequences are often subtle at first. Grocery bills increase, housing costs rise, insurance premiums become more expensive, savings accounts fail to keep up with inflation. Many people work harder but feel like they are falling behind. These are not always dramatic events. They are gradual changes that accumulate over time until the difference becomes impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, the global financial landscape is changing. Countries around the world are exploring ways to reduce dependence on the U.S. dollar. Some nations are conducting trade agreements using local currencies. Others are increasing gold reserves. Central banks are diversifying their holdings. These developments do not mean the dollar will suddenly lose its dominant position. However, they suggest that confidence is no longer as unquestioned as it once was. History offers important lessons. The Dutch guilder was once the world's leading reserve currency. The British pound later assumed that role. Eventually, economic realities shifted and leadership changed. These transitions took years, sometimes decades. They did not happen overnight, but they remind us that reserve currency status is earned through strength and confidence, not guaranteed forever. Many experts argue that the United States still possesses tremendous advantages. It has deep capital markets, strong institutions, innovative companies, and unmatched financial infrastructure. These strengths should not be underestimated. However, even strong systems can face challenges if structural imbalances are ignored for too long. One of the biggest risks is the possibility of a debt spiral. In a debt spiral, governments borrow more money to cover existing obligations. Rising debt leads to higher interest costs. Higher interest costs require additional borrowing. This cycle can become increasingly difficult to control. While the United States is far from the extreme examples seen in smaller economies, the underlying dynamics remain important. Financial markets are already reacting to some of these concerns. Bond yields have experienced periods of volatility. Investors closely monitor government spending plans and fiscal projections. Credit rating agencies have issued warnings about long-term debt sustainability. These developments may seem technical, but they influence borrowing costs throughout the economy, including mortgages, business loans, and consumer credit. The housing market provides a clear example. When government borrowing increases and bond yields rise, mortgage rates often follow. Higher mortgage rates make homes less affordable. This affects buyers, sellers, builders, and the broader economy. Similar effects can be seen across many sectors. Business owners also face challenges. Companies that rely heavily on borrowing may encounter higher financing costs. Expansion plans become more expensive. Investment decisions become more difficult. Economic growth can slow as borrowing becomes less attractive. For retirees, inflation represents a particularly serious concern. Individuals who spent decades saving money often depend on fixed incomes. If living costs rise faster than income, purchasing power declines. This creates financial pressure even when account balances appear unchanged. Young workers face a different challenge. They must navigate an environment where housing, education, and everyday expenses consume a growing share of income. Building wealth becomes more difficult when inflation outpaces wage growth over long periods. So, what happens next? There are several possible paths. The most optimistic scenario involves a gradual adjustment. Policymakers could implement reforms that slow debt growth while supporting economic expansion, productivity improvements, technological innovation, and responsible fiscal management could stabilize the situation. This path would likely involve difficult decisions, but could avoid major disruption. A second possibility involves a prolonged period of higher inflation. Instead of directly reducing debt, governments effectively reduce its real value through inflation. While this may ease debt burdens, it can also erode savings and reduce purchasing power. Many historical debt cycles have followed this pattern. A third possibility involves increased financial volatility. Markets could experience periods of uncertainty as investors reassess risks. Interest rates could remain elevated. Economic growth could become less predictable. Confidence would remain a critical factor. The most severe scenarios involve a significant loss of confidence in government finances, Such outcomes are relatively rare for major reserve currency nations, but history shows they are not impossible. When confidence deteriorates rapidly, financial conditions can change much faster than expected. Ray Dalio often emphasizes that understanding cycles is more important than predicting exact dates. The goal is not to forecast a specific crisis tomorrow morning. The goal is to recognize patterns that have repeated throughout history. Debt cycles, currency cycles, and economic transitions have occurred many times before. While every year is unique, human behavior and financial incentives often produce familiar outcomes. The people who prepare early generally have more options than those who wait until problems become obvious. Preparation does not require panic. It requires awareness. Understanding economic trends allows individuals to make more informed decisions about saving, investing, spending, and risk management. Many investors focus on diversification during uncertain periods. They avoid concentrating all assets in a single category. Others prioritize maintaining emergency savings and reducing unnecessary debt. Some seek investments that have historically performed well during inflationary environments. The specific strategy varies, but the underlying principle remains consistent. Resilience matters. The reality is that most people will not pay attention until the effects become impossible to ignore. That has happened throughout history. Early warning signs often receive little attention because everyday life appears normal. Markets continue functioning. Stores remain open. Jobs continue. Yet beneath the surface, structural pressures continue building. Today's debt challenges did not appear overnight, and they will not be resolved overnight. The coming years may determine whether policymakers successfully manage these pressures or whether larger adjustments become necessary. Either way, the conversation about debt, deficits, inflation, and the future of the dollar is becoming increasingly important. The biggest mistake investors make is assuming that what worked for the last 20 years will automatically work for the next 20 years. Economic environments change, financial systems evolve, risks shift, opportunities emerge. Those who remain informed and adaptable are generally better positioned to navigate uncertainty. Stage 3 may not be the final chapter of the dollar story. It may simply be the beginning of a period of adjustment that reshapes how the global financial system operates. Whether this transition unfolds gradually or accelerates unexpectedly remains one of the most important questions facing the world economy today. And if history teaches us anything, it is that the biggest changes often begin long before the majority of people realize they have already started.